Now let's catch up with the New South Wales Police Minister, David Elliott, who joins us now live from Sydney. Thanks for joining us, David. I want to start with the good news from you first. You're suggesting that during the coronavirus pandemic, the statistics have showed a decline in New South Wales in a range of crimes, including assaults, sexual offences and robberies.
Well, that's right, Chris, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. I mean, the mere fact that we have had limited activities in the community, people have been reluctant to go out, people have spent a lot of time at home, has meant that the risk of robberies, the risk of assaults and a number of other criminal activities has been minimised. And I mean, that's probably the only silver lining to the COVID-19 restrictions, and it has also had the ability to allow police to assist with the implementation of those health orders and to ensure that the community have been complying with them.
Well, the police have had a lot of attention and a lot of criticism coming their way around the world, but in Australia as well in recent weeks with these protests and the like. I want to go to some of this vision that was released yesterday that showed an arrest on the central coast of New South Wales, a male and a female police officer attempting to arrest a man, and just to show from this body cam footage just exactly how difficult this work can be.
21 urgent.
You mother. That's what they do, Mum. Mum, what's what they do?
I had to turn you on your side, and then you elbowed me in the face and grabbed my partner by the head. Calm down. Calm down.
Yeah, both of those officers, a male and female, were hospitalised after that arrest, David Elliott. Are we equipping our police sufficiently to deal with these situations? Every time they go to a domestic disturbance, to a fight at a pub, to knock on someone's door to arrest them, this is the sort of thing that can confront them.
Well, Chris, that's right, and I've just received a briefing from overnight where in the early hours of this morning in Dubbo, two young officers went to a domestic violence recall in that town. They got to the incident. They attempted to separate the man and the wife, and the man and the wife then started to assault the two officers who were there to help them. But to answer your question, I think when I speak to the officers that are injured, and I attempt to ring every single one of them who are injured in the line of duty, none of them ever say to me, "Oh, this could have been avoided with extra something." It's always been that, you know, this is the job that we chose, this was our calling. The police these days, I'm comfortable when it comes to dealing with those domestic and violent events that they have got the training. They've also got the capsicum spray and the Glocks and the handcuffs. So I don't think the training and their appointments or anything that need to be necessarily reviewed, although I'm always open-minded for everything. I think what we need to do is actually ask ourselves why police are being thumped. I want to know why young people, and particularly those that are under the influence of alcohol and drugs, seem to think that it's their God-given right to whack a police officer. And I have spent pretty much the last 2 weeks spending every morning ringing police officers who have been injured in the line of duty. So I've had enough of it, and I know the police have had enough of it, and we're looking at ways in which we can sort of address this culture.
So is a mandatory 6-month sentence for anybody who assaults a police officer the way to address this, as some other states have looked at and implemented?
Well, I think that's an option, a live option. My view is that if there's mandatory sentencing, it's got to be mandatory minimum, not mandatory maximum. That was a great Labor Party trick to make everybody think that they were tough on law and order, but the magistrates still weren't handing it down. And so the Premier and I have had some conversations. I'll be engaging with the Commissioner and the Police Association. I have ordered a parliamentary inquiry. Now, people dismiss parliamentary inquiries. Mine is actually going to be headed by two former police officers who are in the Parliament. One, Mark Taylor, who's the most senior ranking police officer to ever get elected to the New South Wales Parliament. He was a superintendent in charge of police prosecutions, and Wendy Tuckerman, the member for Goulburn. I've deliberately asked those two to make these inquiries because I want them to actually interview people that have been convicted of assaulting police officers. I want to know why it's being done. Is it because the community is not engaging with officers when they're young? Is it because we need to get police back into the schools to talk to the kids about what exactly a police officer is and why you have to listen to them? Or do we need to address cultural changes in the Australian society, so where they've set aside the respect that people had for police in times gone past? I mean, when you and I were kids, if a police officer walked into the room, you'd stand up. If they told you to jump, you'd say how high, and you'd certainly listen to them. But what I've seen in the footage that you've just shown and other footage that I've seen in the last 2 weeks proves to me that we need to address why this is occurring, and I want to know what demographic is primarily involved in bashing our police officers.
You've never had better evidence because the body cams give you that first-hand evidence that can be used in court. You're saying it's a live option to look at minimum mandatory sentences for assaulting police. The Premier of New South Wales this morning, Gladys Berejiklian, said that she was concerned about unintended consequences. Can you tell us that this is your plan, that that's your preference, to bring in a mandatory minimum sentence for this offence? You just want to make sure you get through the processes with this review first? I mean, is that the outcome you're seeking?
Well, that's what I'll listen to the experts about. That's why I've handpicked these two parliamentarians. That's why I want them to speak to these young people. If these young people are saying, well, yes, I bashed a copper and nothing would change and I'd do it again, well, clearly I would have to look at making sure that mandatory minimum sentences are there, because if you say, well, if you're going to do it again, you're going to go to jail. But as the Premier quite rightly said, some of these things, we can't jump at shadows here. Some of these proposals do have unintended consequences, particularly when it comes to criminal activity. So,
all right, you don't want to jump at a proposal. Yeah, you're not just going to write law while you're sitting doing a television interview. But I just want to know that you're committed. You think it's a good idea to have a minimum mandatory sentence for assaulting police officers, and you'll have to have some evidence to talk you out of that.
Well, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. I will always side on the side of the police officers. I will always side against those that want to do harm to our officers in the line of duty. So I will be making sure that any option that is put before me is considered, and if that includes mandatory minimum sentences, well then that's something that we will certainly consider, and it's certainly been the case in interstate. But one of the things I want this inquiry to investigate is has it worked interstate? Because as I said, you know quite rightly, and I've said before, this whole concept of mandatory minimum and mandatory maximum sentences are all very well, but if the magistrates aren't following them, if the magistrates aren't implementing those sentences, those obligations, well then it's no good. And I'd hate to see a magistrate, and some of them have threatened it before, say to me, well, if you've got a minimum sentence, we'll just find them not guilty. Well, that sort of defeats the purpose of the exercise, and that's the sort of unintended consequences that the Premier is addressing.
David Elliott, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Chris.